right, everybody. Hunter Willis here with FinOps Fridays. Today we have Shawn Alpay, the new chair of the Focus Working Group at the FinOps Foundation. Shawn, thanks for joining us today. And just to start, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be on the Focus chair at the FinOps Foundation, man.
Yes, hi, thanks for having me. It has been a circuitous route by which I found myself a part of the Focus Working Group. My whole background is in business intelligence, reporting and analytics, data warehousing, dimensional modeling, this kind of thing. So I've been a consultant for the last 15 years in that space. And when the Focus specification came along, which we'll talk about, of course, a lot here, I was very interested in that. I should also say that our business intelligence consulting firm that I was working at the time created a cloud cost management solution. And so we started building that up. And we saw Focus as a way forward to build the foundation for that platform. And so we got very involved with Focus. And then the more I got involved with the development of that spec as a volunteer, the more I was interested in, spending more and more time on it. And then when a role opened up with the FinOps Foundation to participate as a member of their group, and then to become the chair of the Focus Working Group, I took that opportunity. So I've been in this role actually only a few months. I've been part of the Focus specification for a good year and a half, but as in my new role, it is relatively newly minted.
All right, great. Well, glad to hear that you've taken that on, man. That's really cool. And I'm glad that you could join us today. So thanks again for your time here.
Mhm.
So really quick, we want to dive into those rapid fire questions that we like to ask our guests. So going to get started with that, and then we'll get rolling with some more questions and talk more about Focus.
Sure.
So to start, are you a Mac or PC guy?
Mac, definitely.
All right, Android or Apple?
Android, so that's weird, right? Yeah,
All right, maybe not so weird, right? I don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but yeah, it's definitely not same ecosystem, right?
No.
Chat or email?
Chat, definitely.
All right, and Slack or Teams?
Slack for sure.
And online meetings or in-person meetings?
In-person meetings, although that's just not our reality these days.
That's right. You could say depends, right? But morning person or night owl?
Morning person.
A coffee or tea?
Coffee.
And are you a spring guy or a fall guy?
Fall for sure. The Onion has this article that I look at every year. Mr. Automan, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the gray
It is
sweater and everything.
yes, exactly. Stepping crisply through fall leaves in his cardigan and what have you. That's me. It's live footage of me as Mr. Automan. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so cake or pie?
Pie.
Pie, okay. And pancakes or waffles?
How about neither? How about a
Okay.
bagel?
A bagel. All right. Well, there you go. Third option. I like it. I might have to adjust that question. Dogs or cats?
Cats, 100%.
Okay. On the beach, to the mountains, or take a tour if you go on vacation?
The beach.
Okay. And do you consider yourself introverted or more extroverted?
Given the nature of my role, I wish I was extroverted, but I am an introvert.
So many people in IT, I think, right?
Yes,
That might
yes,
apply too. All
yes.
right. Thank you, Shawn, for bearing with us through those, man. That's a lot of fun. It's good to get to know you a little better too.
Yeah.
All right. So FOCUS stands for the FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification. So talk to us about how FOCUS kind of came to be and the need for it, and then what it is and how we got here, right?
Yeah. So Focus was the brainchild of my predecessor, the chair of the Focus Working Group, Udam Dewaraja. He had a passion for creating a common format and specification for billing data across all providers. And this was trying to respond to a problem that many people have had when it comes to gluing together data across multiple providers, is that the shape of the data is different and the names of the columns are different and the methodologies might be different, and like trying to make sense of gluing together your Azure data, which might come in multiple feeds when it comes to actual versus amortized, together with AWS Cur, together with BigQuery, GCP exports, with SaaS provider data that may be opaque or not, and putting that together with your on-prem costs and your private cloud costs and maybe your labor data, like bringing that all together into a single place is the domain of what my background is, which is business intelligence, it's data warehousing, dimensional modeling. That's something that you have to, a whole subject area of expertise. You have to have a person or a group of people, architects, developers, to build pipelines and perform transformations and put it all into a unified dimensional model, and then build a semantic model on top of that, and then build visualizations on top of that. That's a whole group of people doing that, and those people aren't necessarily FinOps people. So the idea here, just stepping away from that for a second, is like, how do you facilitate some of that, or doing it outside of that subject matter expertise of business intelligence, data warehousing, over here as a FinOps practitioner? How do you glue that data together in a meaningful way? How do you increase the speed of your time to market so that you can put that information together more quickly, more easily, more reliably, and then provide it to your end users of various personas, be it your executive or your engineer or whoever else in your organization might be keen on consuming FinOps data. So that was the genesis of it. And Udom talked on a podcast about it. I forget which one. And J.R. Storment, the executive director of the FinOps Foundation, heard Udom talking about the desire to create this specification, and they got together and essentially brought the idea underneath the umbrella of the FinOps Foundation. So Focus was created as a subsidiary, for lack of a better term, of the FinOps Foundation. A separate working group was created, and Udom led the charge on bringing together a group of equally passionate people on how to solve this problem. So the initial version of Focus was very laser focused on the kind of slam dunk concepts for cloud service provider data, which is to say time and region and resource and SKU and cost, and just slam dunk stuff. Let's just get it all together in the same place, and let's name it similar things. So we're going to use this name across all providers. So it's not going to be actual versus amortized. It's not going to be blended versus unblended. It's going to be billed versus effective. It's going to be unamortized versus amortized data, right? So it's billed and effective. And those are terms that now, if a FinOps practitioner is consuming Focus data, they know what those terms mean because they're documented, and there's documentation online of which previous columns and previous exports go to those concepts. But now you can rely on those things. And further, if you are working at one organization and you move on to the next organization, in theory, if they're also Focus compliant, you're not having to understand the semantics of that new organization. You are then able to just bring your understanding semantically from your previous role into the new role and just hit the ground running. So it's not just time to market for data itself, it's also time to market for you getting up to speed in a role, participating in an organization, and providing value sooner.
Well, and also if somebody's new coming into the industry, right? I mean, there's training available now. They've got a new certification available for it and everything like that too. So if you're just coming or switching roles from a different role into more of a FinOps focused role or a practitioner role, right? That's available too. Is that right?
That's the whole idea behind the Focus Analyst certification, is that if you have taken that certification, that training and cert, then you have a foundational understanding of Focus and the concepts, the terminology, etc., so that if perhaps you're looking to hire a FinOps practitioner, perhaps in your job description you might require Focus Analyst, and then you're expecting a certain level of understanding of Focus terminology, not just Focus terminology, but like billing data concepts that are framed in Focus terminology that you can depend upon in that resource for onboarding into your organization and bringing that expertise. If you are a SaaS provider and you're listening to this, now is the time to get involved. Because in the next few months, we're going to be having conversations that impact not just this release of Focus, but future releases of Focus. And if you want to help influence that work, I would strongly recommend that you get involved with the Focus working group and help us craft the best possible solution. We want to continue to add columns that are CSP focused, because that's always going to be the bread and butter of Focus, and we want to make sure that we're bringing in those concepts too. Like, for example, we don't have invoice ID in the specification yet. So if you want to do invoice reconciliation, we don't have that. Now, as I said a couple minutes ago, a provider can add invoice ID, and indeed some of them have. But we want to have that column natively in Focus so we can say, yes, Focus facilitates invoice reconciliation so that when that invoice ID shows up, you know it's been invoiced, and you can go look at your PDF and you can go make sure that those numbers are aligned. And then the third theme for 1.2 is we are going back and adding some fixes and clarifications to the existing columns in the spec to make sure that we have the requirements in there are very clear, and we've eliminated any inconsistencies or vague notions. We moved very quickly, adding a bunch of columns in the last couple of years, and we want to make sure, based on feedback, that we have made every normative requirement very clear. So when a provider is standing up their export of Focus, or when a consumer is consuming that data, it's clear what it is that's in that column. So that's 1.2. And then beyond 1.2 are many other things that we could possibly do. And I'd say probably top of the list in terms of interest is sustainability. So what would it mean to bring in CO2 equivalent data, or energy consumption, or water consumption? And this is a very tricky topic because every provider is using different methodologies, and they're doing it at different grains, and they're providing it to you at different times. And it's the Wild West out there. And I'm learning as we go, right? So we are partnering with our sustainability special interest group at the FinOps Foundation.
That's great.
And we're depending on them in the next several months to help us generate more specific requirements for what we might add to the spec. Adding columns to a specification is so easy. Having non-functional requirements around the timeliness and accuracy and auditability and all of that stuff, that's the much harder part. Like we could just go ahead, actually.
What, I was just going to say, like, but coming from the FinOps Foundation too, you don't want to make like you said, sustainability, when you're talking about like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, data normalization and all that stuff, you don't want to spit out recommendations and put in gaps and column sheets that nobody's ever going to be able to fill in, right?
Yes.
Or to adhere to. So
yeah, so that's a conversation we've started, recognizing it's going to take some time for us to align on what we put in Focus. So it's not in scope for this version, but it might be in scope for next version, depending on what that group collates around. So there's that. We might want to bring in observability data. Like we don't have CPU percentages or consume memory or IO or throughput. That's all stuff that we could add too, right? So, and then there's a long list of stuff in the backlog of smaller things or very large topics we haven't delved into. But my point is there's years worth of stuff to work on in Focus, but the more folks we get involved in the working group, the faster we can go. So another call to action I would have for your listeners is, if you're interested in helping contribute to that and increasing the velocity of the working group to get to working on something that you care about, get involved, join our user group, join the working group, help us move more quickly through that large backlog.
And that can be done by visiting FinOps.org. If you go to focus.finops.org directly, that's the landing page for the Focus specification, right?
That's right, yes. Going there, you can see how to get started with Focus datasets. You can go, there's a support page where you can email focus@finops.org for any questions you might have. If you're on the FinOps Foundation Slack, there's a couple different Focus channels that you can join. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can, there's many ways to engage, but I would say start with focus.finops.org, and that will give you kind of a one-stop shop of like how to contribute, how to get involved, how to better understand what Focus is. What I've seen as a consultant in large organizations is a business unit says to me, and this is not FinOps we're talking about, they say to me, my enterprise data warehouse team, they've got their thing going on and I'm not going to bother them with this. I'm just going to do this myself. And then they go and reinvent fire. And they've got their little fiefdom in here, and it doesn't agree with what's going to the CFO coming from the EDW. My point is, I worry about that maybe happening in FinOps, where they say they don't understand FinOps, and I'm busy, and I don't have the time or the space to really get into data governance with them and explain these concepts. I'm just going to build it myself. And so they try to build it themselves, and they may have some measure of success doing that. But then it's a different version of the truth. Then it's not necessarily built up the best practices of how you might build transformations, et cetera. So I guess what I'm saying here, my concern and the thing I try to evangelize when talking about focus and FinOps in general is how can we bring those two groups of people together, the FinOps practitioner and the data architect, data engineer, not the FinOps engineer, but the data engineer or the developer of BI, how to bring those people together, because that will create a more useful long-term solution in your organization if that partnership is being stoked. So that's a bit tangential to focus, but I do think that with the specification, if the data engineer over in enterprise IT can read a spec about focus and the FinOps practitioner can read a spec about focus, they can use similar terminology, and then that kind of facilitates that conversation. So the more that focus becomes part of the furniture, the more that I see that harmonization of the FinOps people and the BI people occurring or has a better chance of happening.
Well, and to add to that, I would say that that's something that we deal with like constantly, and it's in the fabric of everything that we've done with Cloudability and ever at IBM and the different things that we're pulling together too.
Yeah.
I would say though, to your comment that this is tangential, if we're not talking about the operations and how people are actually going to dive into this though, right? That's where the rubber meets the road. And we talk about this a lot, and that's why FinOps on and its whole is so valuable as the framework to bring all this stuff together. When you talk about capability, maturity, and the different actions that people have to take and best practices, et cetera. And now you're talking about focus specification being this, kind of glue that's going to bring all this data together. It's like organizations need these recommendations. They need to understand this, and that the operationalization of all of this stuff is something that maybe we could all focus on a little bit more, right? And the kind of relational best practices that you just mentioned is something, because I've talked to a lot of people about a lot of personas, and nobody's ever talked about a data warehouse guy coming in to bring this into the organizational format beyond like what the data they're getting out of the cloud or what their FinOps team is like putting together, right? So no, I think it's really poignant and it's important to touch on.
Yeah, the FinOps framework has three phases. It's got inform, optimize, and operate. That inform piece, it's implied, but I would really want to underscore it, is that's business intelligence. That's reporting and analytics. That's telling a data story. And like the simple word inform implies so much of like grabbing data and landing it in a data store, data lake, data warehouse, and then transforming it and putting it into a model and building aggregations and naming things properly and building hierarchies and putting it in front of eyeballs and having governance around it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
That's just the first phase. Like just putting data in front of eyeballs it's been my whole career.
Yeah.
And it's super important to get that right, because you can't do the other phases without getting that visibility right.
Well, and that's the importance of a common specification speaks for itself when you talk about it like that. And then the other thing I want to say is that what we're reporting on is increasing every day as well, because there's more and more SaaS applications. There's more now. It's like AI is this new layer of stuff, and are the data warehouses and the data centers for what's hosting AI stuff, is that all going to be in the same kind of public clouds that we've all been using, or are we going to be starting to use proprietary clouds, and are we going to have to build our own private clouds again to handle the AI stuff that we want to invest in, et cetera? And then like I'm starting to look on the horizon at quantum computing and what that's, we're not anywhere with a practical thing with quantum computing yet, but it's like I'm starting to feel it kind of coming. You're seeing it more and more, and people are starting to try to figure out the use cases for that. So it's only going to grow, and organizing it and operationalizing it is just going to be more important.
Whenever anyone says like AI for FinOps, for example, I immediately think BI for FinOps. It's like in order to facilitate any of that, like you have to be able to tell the story of the current state of where the data is, and that requires bringing that data together in a meaningful way, and that requires a partnership, like I said already, between someone who understands the subject matter and somebody who understands how to build data structures properly.
All right. Well, Shawn, this is awesome. This has been a great conversation, man. Again, I really appreciate your time. Any final words before we sign off here?
Like I said, if you've listened to this conversation and you are all interested or intrigued in the concepts, please get in touch. Please get involved with Focus. The more hands we have on the work, the faster we can move, and the better solution we'll build. So please consider getting involved, and give us your feedback if you think that something should be added to Focus or something should be changed with Focus. That'd be incredibly helpful as well.
All right. And again, that's head over to focus.finops.org to check that out. There's also, we touched on green ops or like sustainability carbon reporting. There's a working group on that as well. So check out that information and a lot of the other topics there too. They're working groups for and community feedback for on the FinOps Foundation. Again, FinOps Foundation's main website is finops.org. So again, if you have questions about that, want to learn more about anything that we talked about today, head on over there, check it out. Again, this is Hunter Willis with FinOps Friday signing off. Shawn, thanks again for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.